Hello, Body of Messiah. Today we're going to cover additions to COOH, Lesson 5, titled, Which Israel Are You Praying For? We're going to cover part 2 today, and we're going to cover part 3. Adonai Elohim convicted me in my spirit to cover this to drive home the fact for especially intercessory prayer warriors of understanding clearly which Israel are you praying for, and to put that in perspective, so that these prayer warriors and prayer people, intercessory prayer warriors, will understand that it's a part of coming out of her, that you clearly understand which Israel you're praying for. So the intercessory prayer warriors are on the front line spiritually of these latter days. So we're trying to get this right so that you get a clear understanding, the perspective, and the understanding of God's spirit and his heart when it comes to praying for Israel. I'm going to share with you two brief testimonies before we get into the lesson. I have a testimony from about 6 years ago from a place where I was at a congregation, and I was at the bookstore in that congregation. I had finished helping with some other stuff there, and in that congregation, the people knew I was known for speaking up about racial issues in the most polite way as possible. And at the end of the bookstore, about to close, this particular person who was cashiered there was waiting, I could tell, for people to clear out because she wanted to talk about a topic. And she waited for most of the people, they were like gone, and my children were out of there. And she began to question me about the latest shooting, which was Mike Brown. And she began to say to me, ask me directly, what do you think about this shooting? I said, well, it's another example of another shooting of an unarmed young black man that was murdered by a police officer. And she said, I mean, why was he walking in the middle of the street, him and his friend? I said, well, I don't know. I said, but I used to live in a small country town, and I'm pretty sure you did too. And I don't care what city or town that you're in, if the streets are empty, people jaywalk. And they do it without fear of a police officer threatening their lives or becoming hostile over it. I said, even with him and his friend walking in the middle of the street, do you think it was justifiable that his life be taken? And she was like, no. I said, you have walked in the middle of the street before. She was like, yeah, I have. When I was younger, I did. I said, okay. She said, well, they said he had robbed a convenience store. I said, well, regardless of whether or not he had, at that moment, the police officer had no idea. He was only focusing on flaunting his authority over Mike Brown and Mike Brown's friend. Out of his arrogance and his hostility and the hostile way which he told them to get out the street, he was just angry. He was angry, and his anger caused him to take the life of an innocent young man, no matter how you slice or dice it. I said, even if you thought that he might have thought there was some cigars robbed from a convenience store, is it really supposed to be that someone's life is justifiably taken who had their hands up in the air and there are witnesses to give the account that didn't know Mike Brown nor the police officer, yelling, people saying he had his hands up, that wasn't right. I said, so is that justifiable? She said, no. So she went to go into asking questions about other murders of unarmed black men and women. And I shared a couple of them with her, and then I had to stop her. And I said, look, you know what troubles me the most? She said, what? I said, you're an intercessory prayer warrior. And I'm noticing throughout the body of Messiah, most of the white members, the Caucasian members of the congregation, have the convenience of arguing the logistics of all these scenarios and why this might have happened and why it's justifiable and why this and that. And I said, but I'm sitting here, me and many others, with me and members of my family who look just like these people whose lives are being taken, and no one's going to jail for it. I said, but the one thing I want you to think about is the fact that just the other day, one of my children came to me, and as they're looking at TV and looking at the news, they witnessed the fifth or sixth, seventh black person being murdered and no one going to jail for it. And that child looks at me and says, Mom, it seems like they're trying to kill us all. They're trying to get rid of us all. I said, now you tell me, what am I to say to that child? Children, as innocent as they are, knows and sees injustice. So what are you supposed to say? All of this arguing logistic doesn't matter. They clearly see the injustice because they're close to the spirit of the Most High. And at that moment, she dropped her head and tears welled up in her eyes. And she looked up at me and said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I said, no. I said, look, you can keep your apology. But I said, just do what you're supposed to do. I said, you're an intercessory prayer warrior. I said, pray for me and my family and people that look like me. I said, aren't you obligated to pray for those who are oppressed or who are used and abused and pray against injustice? She said, yes. I said, that's the issue. Most of these prayer warriors don't think twice about praying for the oppressor or the officer or the person that has taken someone's life, but they never want to pray for the person who is the victim. I said, so please do that for me. And she said, I will. So she's gone on and passed on to be in the presence of the Most High. She's in the bosom of Abraham. She passed away maybe like 2 years or less after that situation. Now I'm going to share another situation with you. It probably was about 3.5 years ago, and there was another Caucasian older lady who came to me, and she was fussing about, the removal of Confederate monuments. And you can look at the whole details of that conversation. I have a video out there called Messiah's Body regarding Confederate monuments. And you can look at the details of that whole discussion we had. But I'm going to fast forward to the end of that discussion and something that I said to her that is very pivotal. And I said to her, look, y'all are going to have a price to pay for this younger generation of young children, young men, white men, and young women. I said, because I've heard several times you and other congregation members, other fellow Caucasians say that they're rebellious. You're calling them rebellious, and you don't know what's wrong with them because they're sitting there and they're standing alongside people requesting that these Confederate monuments be torn down. They're also kneeling down along with athletes, Kaepernick, because they're not going to honor a flag when this injustice is going on. And y'all are calling them rebellious and disrespectful. Now, y'all got a price to pay for that. And she said, how so? What do you mean? I said, y'all are calling them rebellious, but this is not what they are. What's happening with that younger generation is they see spiritual hypocrisy. And she said, how so? I said, think about it. They see y'all losing your mind over the removal of Confederate monuments. They see y'all losing your mind, cursing and fussing about athletes who are kneeling and so-called disrespecting a flag. And they see this going on with y'all, and y'all are so passionate about it. But then they're also watching, wow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, continuous amount of Black unarmed men and women are being murdered before the eyes of the entire world. And the person who took their lives walked free, and you not say a word. Or you're trying to justify why it's okay for a Black or brown person to be murdered. And they're disgusted by that. It torments them spiritually because they know it is blatant hypocrisy. And they know something that most Black and brown people know. And she said, what is that? I said, if our Messiah was walking around today, which side do you think he'd be on? The Most High God, his Father, is the defender of the poor, the needy, the oppressed. He is their defender. So whose side do you think our Messiah would be on? And at that moment, she was quiet and didn't have too much to say and kind of walked off. I'm like, well, but listen, body of Messiah, especially intercessory prayer warriors. God is telling y'all to spiritually come out of her, come out of Babylon, the whore of Babylon. We're in this present day and time where there is the coronavirus or COVID-19 occurring. This is a plague. And in Revelation 18, God is saying, come out of her, my people, if you do not want to partake of her plagues and all these judgments that are going to fall on her. Throughout the book of Revelation, when you just look at Revelation chapter 17 and 18, it says that the whore of Babylon gained her riches and all her wealth from the oppression and the slaughter of others, the innocence of many. When you look at Revelation chapter 18, verse 7, it specifically says in there, it tells you how arrogant she is. She thinks in her mind, I'm a queen. She's rich beyond measure. I'm not a widow. I will never see grief. She thinks she will never see grief or have to pay for all of this slaughter and benefiting for it financially. And God is saying, not so. So, as an intercessory prayer warrior, if you are praying for Israel, think about this fact. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Mantix Bradford. And now we got George Floyd. All were murdered, innocent people, unarmed, who did nothing wrong. All are ancient descendants of Patriarch Abraham, and even further, ancient descendants of Israel. Which Israel are you praying for? God cares for them and he loves them. And this is the forefront of his care. Listen, if you are grafted in Hebrew or have found yourself in this great awakening being an actual descendant of Patriarch Abraham, you have to spiritually come out of her. Whenever a plague falls, there has to be amends made. And if we move forward arrogantly as warriors, prayer warriors, thinking no amends have to be made, then you have to think that possibly your prayers will fall on deaf ears. Now, I'm going to share 2 scriptures with you to drive home this point, that God cares for those who cry out. Okay, first we have Genesis chapter 18. Genesis chapter 18, verses 20 and 21. It says, Then Adonai said, The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great indeed, and their sin is very grievous indeed. I want to go down now and see if they deserve destruction, as this outcry has come to me. Adonai, after visiting Patriarch Abraham, is stating this. The outcry is great because their sin is so grievous. He's saying, I'm going to go down and I want to see if they deserve destruction. Think about this in the latter days when we talk about the whore of Babylon and the plagues that are falling on her. The next scripture that I have here for you is Exodus chapter 2, verses 22 through 25. Now it came about over the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. Bnei Israel groaned because of their slavery. They cried out, and their cry from slavery went up to God. God heard their sobbing and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw Bnei Israel, and he was concerned about them. Both of these scriptures should show you that God hears the cry of those who are suffering. And as we see this continuous pattern of the beast system tormenting and trying to slaughter and torment the descendants, the ancient descendants of Israel, the Hebrew descendants of Patriarch Abraham, all of those unarmed black men and women, are those descendants. So you must understand and be clear. Which Israel are you praying for and come out of her? God placed judgment and plagues, 10 of them, over and over again on the ancient Egyptians. Because of this fact, the cry of those descendants of Israel, crying out from the oppression. What do you think is happening each time there is an unarmed person who is lost or killed or murdered, basically, and their murderer goes free? They're crying out to the Most High. So make sure when God is telling you, prayer warriors, to come out of her, that you're on the right team when it comes to which Israel you're praying for. Come out of her. You're his people. Well, Body Messiah, this is the end of part 2 of lesson 5 of COOH. Please join me for part 3. I'm going to focus on some prayer points that we need to make sure that we keep in our heart and our spirit as these latter days are going forward. Because it's not going to get easier if we don't face the truth. It's going to be harder for those who don't want to hold on to the truth. But we want to be covered completely by Adonai's shield of protection and his grace and mercy. So let's proceed in truth and own up to that truth and profess the truth. Well, Adonai Elohim has placed this message on my heart, and I put it out there as best as possible. I hope it resonates with your spirit and cause you to step forward with honoring his word as you pray for those who are going through hard times during this time. And I thank you so much for joining me. And like I always say to you, until next time, may Adonai Elohim cover you and shower you and your family with his shalom peace. Goodbye.